Hello everyone and welcome to Scrassical Narrative. My name's Alex and I'm coming to you to let you all know a few things. This is going to be the first horror story recording to be uploaded onto this channel. Now, with that, we are having open submissions for viewer stories. If you have any stories in the genres of Let's Not Meet, creepy monster encounters, stalkers, anything like that, feel free to email us them and we will put them in the video as best as we can accommodate. Now, without any further ado, let's get into the story of 5 horror stories of Fleshgates and Skinwalkers. Number 1. I think I saw a Fleshgate. I just now learned about this subreddit and what Fleshgates are, and it immediately reminded me of an encounter I had once. Mind you, it must have been around 12 years now, and I am 19 now, so my memory is very weak. It was a very short encounter also, but I thought it was worth sharing. Basically, my dad and I were on our way home one night, and it was very late. It was pitch black out, so we were completely relying on our headlights. The road our house was on started with a winding road that went up to the plateaus and then a long stretch. When you first reached the top of the winding road, there is a little marsh on the right and a wooded area to the left. Right as we got to the marsh, we both saw what looked like a hairless monkey running on all fours across the road towards the marsh. We both saw it as it was very snowy white, which also made it hard to see any detail because it shined so bright with the car light on. I don't remember it actually looking at us either, and I may give an update later if I remember to ask my dad for his account. I didn't see it after it ran across the front window, but because it was too dark on the other side of the car. I have marked exactly on Google Maps where I remember seeing it. Something to consider is that just down the road there is a native thing. I don't even know what to call it. You pay to go in and it's like a native village. I'm not sure if it was converted to a tourist attraction or if it was built for the sake of being a tourist thing. Again, I haven't been there in years. That just reminds me of the Skinwalkers, although it wasn't wearing any fur or anything. This is in southern Canada, so it couldn't have been a diseased monkey, and I don't think that the area had bears or anything of that size of any normal explanation. Edit. So I asked my dad and he didn't seem to remember it. However, my sister overheard and she said she remembered it, so I guess she was in the car. She was even able to point out the location without me mentioning it. She confirmed it did, in fact, look like a pale, hairless monkey. She added that she remembers searching lights, but I do not remember this. Number 2. Skinwalker or other entity. Now, this happened when I was 10 years old in Texas. We had gone out for a family party in DeSoto, Texas, and it was probably close to about 3 in the morning. All the adults were inside talking and drinking, while the kids were out in the backyard playing in the bounce house that was ordered. A bit into the fun we were having, we started noticing a strange smell, which I would now consider the smell of sulfur, when one of our cousins pointed out a goat near the fence in the field just watching us. So being kids, we all get up against the little net to see it. Now the strange thing about it was the way it let its mouth hang open and how it was standing there in the tall grass with its wet legs wobbling like he was going to fall, just staring at us. So we all decided to go for a closer look, not thinking much of it. And that's when it got even weirder, when the goat started making what sounded like excited grunts, and when we got near the fence it let out a human-like but very distorted yell that sounded like it had its own echo, and it bolted from the fence on its hind legs and its front legs loose, bouncing around as it ran. So we all screamed and ran inside. Some of our parents heard us screaming and met us on the back door, and we were able to see it run off into the tall grass, letting out that same yell. Upon telling everyone what happened, our grandparents were convinced it was an evil spirit and began saying prayers and flicking holy water around the house. Considering they were Catholic with very strong beliefs, and our drunk uncles and fathers went out with guns looking for it. Shortly after they came home, everyone decided it was time to go home, and a few weeks later, my grandparents decided to move because they also began to hear something shaking the fence in the middle of the night and grunting. What sounded like something choking, moving around the backyard, and occasionally knocking on the walls. Anyways, that's it for the story. Back then, I never knew about things like skinwalkers and such, and for the longest time I was convinced it was a demon or the devil in disguise, since that's what my grandparents and aunties claimed it was. What do you guys think of this? Edit. No, we didn't just arrive at 3 a.m. We had been there since about 5 p.m. Number 3. Screaming Entity. Not sure if this would really fit here. While I reasoned away as a nightmare, various mental checks I normally have in place for lucid dreaming didn't give any of the usual doubts. It was late into the night when I felt something knocking against the side of my bed. Thinking it was the cat, I opened my eyes and I was about to get up when I noticed something hunched over my head. I froze in fear for a moment, thinking someone had broken into my home, but the thing started to croak, "How, how, how," and seemed to notice it. I'd woken up, the hairs on my back stood up so high that it stung. While I didn't lift my head, I could see the torso of the entity. It was pale white and looked at the point of starvation. The ribs were clearly visible. It lumbered towards the head of the bed, standing right next to my face. It smelled strongly of stale urine. It rose up, skeletal hands passing by my face, and it began a terrifying scream. Something you'd expect from a horror movie, starting with a croak and raising into an animalistic howl. At this point, I made up my mind to throw an uppercut punch from my bed, at which point I felt a sharp shock before waking in my bed. Despite writing it off as a nightmare, I turned on the light and lay in bed until the sun rose with the lights on, hackles never settling for a moment. Like I said, probably just a realistic feeling nightmare, but I was looking around for something that matched it, and this seemed right. Number 4. My story. We take a family trip to Arizona every year to stay with my uncle and just get away from the city life. As a young kid, I always loved these trips, but was always too scared to go outside with the adults at night. Well, when I was 17, I thought I was invincible and the coolest guy ever, so I decided to steal one of my uncle's cigarettes and go smoke outside one night. He lives in the middle of God knows where, and you can always hear animals just out of sight of the porch lights. I love nature, and sounds like bushes moving don't really scare me because it's probably a rabbit or a bird or something. Nothing to fear, right? Well, for whatever reason, this night was different. It was dead silent, and I don't mean normal nighttime silent. I mean, there wasn't any sound. I stay outside in the overwhelming silence for maybe 10 minutes before I finally hear something. It sounded like something was scratching the sand just out of sight, and my heart dropped when I saw a cloud of dust come out of the darkness towards me. Now, I wasn't scared of the dust itself, but of what was making it. I still don't know any animal that kicks up dust like that. I'm froze at this point, basically waiting for whatever my brain was imagining to come and end me, but I snapped out of it when I heard this clicking sound. I ran inside and locked all the doors, then jumped in bed and hid. Next came the scratching. I could hear something tapping and scratching the wall next to me from the outside. Not trying to get in, but like whatever was curious. I dared not move, and I felt like my body was on fire, frozen in ice at the same time. After the scratching stopped, it was completely silent again. No sounds for maybe 5 minutes. I finally got the courage to move the second my moving made the bed creak. I heard the most terrifying sound in my life. It was a scream, but it sounded like when cats or dogs talk, like in videos, but added some clicking like you're gurgling mouthwash. The next day, neither my uncle or anyone in town had anything to say, and I still haven't gotten any answers. Number 5. Was it a coyote or something far more sinister? So in 2015, I made a self-funded trip to St. Louis, Missouri, to visit my cousin who lived with her husband for 5 weeks. I'm from Australia, and this was my first ever trip overseas. Though I was 18 and female, I have plenty of common sense, so my parents trusted me to make the trip, which included a 16-hour flight across the Pacific and a 5-hour stop over in Dallas Airport alone. All of this I did with relative ease. The stay at my cousin's was great. We saw the St. Louis sights, and I particularly enjoyed visiting the national parks. Being a nature-oriented person myself and very good with animals, this is very important to my encounter, as I am able to identify animals on sight due to a childhood interest in reading books about animals, and so I know a lot of the morphology of different animals. Anyway, one night my cousin decided to take me to a famous ice cream parlor whose name I can't remember, but it is really well known and kind of set up like a kiosk. To get there, we had to drive 20 minutes. It was my cousin and her husband in the front, with myself and their 2 young children in the back. As we drove, we passed through an area that was lit by street lamps but very deserted. To visualize this part of the road, it was split into 2 parts, with a median strip separating the 2 opposing flows of traffic. On our side of the road was original residential houses, and on the other side was a large storm drain that was once a river. There is a large grassy tread area on the riverside that separates it from the road, which has multiple streetlights. It was rather windy night, so as it was autumn-fall at the time. I have always loved looking out the window at night while driving, and at this point, I was looking out the window across from me, which meant I was looking across the 2 little kids. We were traveling slowly, probably about 80 kilometers, around 50 miles per hour, so I got a good look at the trees in the median strip. As we neared the next light, I saw what I thought was a coyote just standing underneath the streetlight. The night was so dark around the light, so it really illuminated the canine. I was excited. This was my first larger American animal. In Australia, we don't have wolves or coyotes, only feral dogs, foxes, and dingoes, which don't live near me. I didn't point it out to everyone else in the car because as we got closer, I realized it was too big to be a coyote. It was more the size of a wolf, but its characteristics were of a coyote. Pointed face, a long tail. It didn't look like a dog. It had wild gray brindle coat and thick hackles that were raised along its back. Though it showed no other sign of distress, it just stood under the light with its head lowered. But the thing that kept me quiet was the fact that it was staring directly at me. Not at the car, not anybody else in the car, but at me. Our eyes were locked, and I realized that its eyes were yellow, like a bright lamp-like yellow. It didn't frighten me, but made me incredibly uncomfortable, like I had a sudden rush of adrenaline. As soon as our eyes made contact, I felt like prey. We passed the beast, and it continued to stare at me as we drove by. Looking over my shoulder confirmed that it was still looking at me. The strange thing was, aside from its head, the coyote hadn't moved, not a leg, not even its coat in the wind. As we got further down the road, I asked if anyone had seen it, to which the answer was no. I found it odd as it was so noticeable under the streetlight. Anyway, we got the ice cream, me thinking about the coyote the whole time, and we headed home along the same road. I looked for it, but couldn't see it. I paid no mind after I couldn't see it again, but a strange thing happened later that night. At around 4 a.m., I woke up feeling terrified in my bed. I remained perfectly still with little breathing. I do this when I'm frightened in bed. It was utterly silent, like nothing ever. Normal night noises that you would ever expect in a town. Then suddenly there was a huge bang, and I heard a car alarm going off and later ambulance lights. It turns out there was a car crash just outside my cousin's house. We asked around and found out that the driver has swerved to avoid a large animal and hit a power pole. No one could identify the animal. I wonder if it was my coyote, and if so, did it follow me? I know about stories of skinwalkers, but that is southwestern USA, not Missouri. I have always been sensitive to supernatural things, and I got an unnatural vibe from that coyote, and that the feeling of terror before the car crash was queer. I also know that my cousin's husband was Native American heritage. What was under that street lamp that night? Thanks for listening, everyone. If you liked the video, why not drop a like and subscribe? We will be here pumping out as much content as we possibly can for your viewing pleasure. So, until next time, I look forward to seeing you in the next video.